Hello, I'm Keith Hocton, author, historian, and host of Rearview Mirror Chronicles, where we take a look back at the people and the moments that shaped our world through history. Hello. I get all sorts of questions that come in about particular podcasts that I've done over the past kind of 18 months, 2 years. And some of them are actually really amusing, and some of them actually take a little bit of thought to respond to. So I thought I'd do a mini-series on strange questions that I get asked and give you the historical answers. And what I can guarantee you is it will be things that you would never, ever have thought of. So let's go with question 1, because I think it actually deserves to be shared. And as I said, this one genuinely amused me. So the question is, who was the last survivor of the Crimean War? Now, before we get to that answer, we should probably remind ourselves what the Crimean War actually was, because for most people it survives as a blur of mud and cannons and moustaches, brilliant moustaches, I have to say, and of course the famous charge of the Light Brigade. The war actually began because the Russian Empire wanted more influence over the weakening Ottoman Empire. And Britain and France looked at this and thought, absolutely not. Britain in particular was terrified that Russia was pushing southwards towards the Mediterranean and possibly, maybe eventually, towards their bases in India. So what began as an argument over holy sites and Christian shrines in the Middle East very quickly became a giant geopolitical bar fight involving empires and pride and absolute terrible military planning. And of course, it gave us all these very famous moments. It gave us Sevastopol, Balaclava, Florence Nightingale, stalking hospital corridors with a lamp, and of course British cavalry charging heroically into the wrong valley because somebody actually misunderstood their orders. The British even captured Russian cannons, during that war, and they later melted some of the metal down to create the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest award for bravery, which I think is rather poetic, when you kind of think about it. But here's where the story becomes gloriously absurd. In those days, there was a very strange legal peculiarity involving the town of Berwick-upon-Tweed. And historically, it had changed hands between England and Scotland so many times that official documents often listed it as a separate entity. So when Britain declared war on Russia, the declaration effectively read something like Victoria, Queen of Great Britain, Ireland, Berwick-upon-Tweed, and the British Dominion beyond the seas, etc., etc. The problem was that when peace was actually declared in 1856, nobody specifically mentioned Berwick-upon-Tweed in the peace treaty, which technically meant, at least according to local legend, that Berwick remained at war with Russia for another 110 years. And in 1966, the mayor of Berwick finally signed a symbolic peace agreement with a Soviet official and announced, at last the Russian people can sleep peacefully in their beds, knowing that the people of Berwick-upon-Tweed could have attacked you at any moment, but now won't. Which may be one of the greatest examples, I think, of British humour ever recorded. And oddly enough, even today, Berwick sits in England while its football team, its soccer team, actually plays in the Scottish League, which somehow feels entirely appropriate for a town that accidentally spent a century technically at war with Russia. But of course, now let me circle back to that question. Who was the only survivor of the Crimean War? Well, it wasn't a soldier. It wasn't an admiral. It wasn't even a cavalry officer. It was a tortoise, and it was a naval tortoise called Timothy the tortoise. Timothy was the mascot aboard HMS Queen and was actually present during the first bombardment of Sevastopol. He never actually fought, which is probably wise because tortoise-based cavalry charges rarely succeed. But he was absolutely there. He was officially part of the campaign, and he actually outlived every human veteran of the war. In fact, Timothy actually survived until 2004, which means a creature present during the Crimean War was actually still alive during the era of the internet and mobile phones and reality television. History is strange sometimes, and occasionally the last witnesses to empire and cannon fire and one of Britain's most famous wars turns out not to be a decorated general, but a very patient tortoise. Thanks for sending the question in. Bye for now.